Give me a sec. Just going to do the first half. Right. So good. Welcome to everyone. This is partnering partnership. Can't even say the name of my own network. The partnering partnership peer conversation. What coaching techniques can I use as an HRBP? So we survey our members every year. This was on the list of things you'd like to see. For obvious reasons, it can help a conversation no end by having some coaching skills. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Really grateful to two top executive coaches, Kate and Anton, for speaking at this session and putting, as I say, such thought and care into it. Kate Mansfield is an author, program director and coach at Career Counselling Services. Anton Fishman is a coach, mentor, flag waver for HR. Love that job title, Anton, and one of our advisory board members. So as I say, we never record peer conversations. The reason for that is that they're under the Chatham House rule usually. They usually feature two or three heads of HR speaking very candidly about their roles. That's the value we bring to you in terms of the peer conversations. But it occurred to me after a query from network member Serena Grandi that we could record the first 30 minutes of this because it's about techniques and learning and share the learning a bit further. So for the first 30 minutes or so, we're going to be recording, and then we're going to go to a demo which Kate's running, a live demo, which we won't record. So at that point, we'll be stopping recording. Talking of the demo, Kate's going to briefly demonstrate how to conduct a coaching conversation, and we'd love a volunteer for that. So if you fancy bringing some things that you'd like to be coached on, let us know in the chat. It could be a personal thing. Kate suggested go to the gym more, I think, which is quite a good for everyone. Or it could, of course, be a work issue. So drop us a line in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Talking of the chat as well, we have a question for you to consider while you listen, which is what I'll put in the chat in just a minute, which is, what issues do you think might prompt a coaching conversation? So what issues do you think might prompt a coaching conversation? And we'll get that going in the chat in just a minute. But for now, Anton, if I can invite you to put your slides up, which would be fantastic. And everyone else, if I can trouble you to go on mute. And Anton, the floor is yours. Thank you ever so much for kicking us off.
Uh, Thank you. Let me just get this up on screen. There we go. Can we all see that? Um, so what we thought we might start off with this is to say, look, we have conversations all the time, but not all of them are going to be coaching conversations. So initially we thought, let's just clarify what's not a coaching conversation. It's not an informal chat. It's not when you're taking a brief, when someone is quite clearly saying to you, we need to do X or Y. It's not about information sharing. It's not when you actually have to be telling someone else what needs to be done or what the situation should be. And it's not about reviews and catch-ups. And it's not a social conversation. So if it's none of these, when is it appropriate to have a coaching style conversation which adopts some of the disciplines loosely or in a quite disciplined way? What prompts that? What are the things that might occur, either in terms of the issue raised by the person you're talking to or the issue you want to raise? So what are the prompts? And was our first little exercise, which Richard wants to encourage you just to think about for a little bit there, but to put your thoughts down in the chat. What issues do you think might prompt a coaching conversation? And put your answer in the chat. And I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes there because obviously we want to share our perspective on what those prompts are, and the major categories they fall into and what a coaching conversation structure then looks like following on from that. And a little bit compare and contrast between what a one-off coaching conversation is and a longer term coaching relationship, which is something we're not really going to be talking about today, but we thought the contrast might be helpful for you just to get us going. So a little bit of thought about what issues do you think might prompt a coaching conversation, and just pop that in the chat. And we'll look at those a little bit later. Okay, well, let me just move on to talk about coaching conversations. Um, in our experience, it's often that they fall into three major categories, and they're actually somewhat different. And as Kate will come on to this, may require different approaches to dealing with that. But the first one is, in a sense, the easiest one to recognize when someone says, look, I've got this problem, I've got this issue. Can I just talk it through with you? So it's a very clear and express need that they have. It might be a performance issue, it might be something that's really quite personal to them. It might be something about the team that they're managing, and they can articulate that, at least in their own mind, it's reasonably clear. The second one is when things are a bit vague. They say, I'm not sure quite what's going on here, but I've got a feeling that something's not quite right. Or I'm worried about, in a general sense, performance or morale. Or we've got some gaps that I'm trying to fill and I'm struggling to find the right people to fill it. This is a clear need, but it's not clearly expressed. Where again, your role may well be one of helping them clarify actually what the need is and therefore what might be done. So it's much more about helping someone think through, clarify in their own mind what the real deep root issue is. And it's a different way of engaging with them. The third category is where it's quite clear to you that something needs to be addressed, but it's less clear to the person you're talking about. Where actually the need to coach and advise is quite evident to you, but isn't necessarily evident to the individual that you're talking to. It might be that you've seen some dysfunction in the team, or you're a little bit concerned about their own behavior. Again, ideally suited to a coaching conversation. But again, how you enter into it and some of the challenges associated with it are different to the other two that I'm talking about there. But the key thing in a conversation is there's no formal contract. It's just the thing that you do when you are together. As a conversation, it's typically a one-off event that's there. It might lead on to other things, but essentially what you're trying to do is engage and review and dig deep and move on in the moment. And to begin with, it may well blur the lines as far as you're concerned between coaching, between mentoring and being directive, and you have to make some in the moment choices about that because you've not contracted to coach the individual. And it may well be that as things emerge, you need to be a little bit more directive. It may be that it turns on and says, actually, you may need to say, well, actually, now that it's quite clear, what can I do to help you? So it's rather different to a coaching relationship where you have decided to work together over quite a long period of time, where you actually do contract to formally work, say every 2 weeks or every month, you'll meet up, you'll talk for an hour, and you'll probably agree at the beginning what some of the goals are. You'll set up regular meetings. There will be quite a lot of structure rather than dealing with this in the moment. Very much focused on reflection, non-directed questions, and the like. And one of the things that I wanted to contrast is that in the coaching conversations, you remain in role. Uh, they are the manager or the executive, you remain the HR business partner. In the coaching relationship, this blurs the hierarchical status of each. You are much more uh, colleagues and peers in the process of discourse that takes place between the two of you. So I want to put the coaching relationship to one side because we're not really talking about that longer term engagement. It's about how you have a conversation that takes the form of a coach stroke mentoring dialogue. And I just want to unpick those three drivers for the coaching conversation to briefly talk about what the ideal outcomes might be. I think if we all had a little bit more time, I'd be asking you what those might be. But let me just run through these quite quickly. The first one we had was the driver for that is to explore and resolve, if time allows, something that is explicitly expressed as a need or as an issue. And in terms of the outcome, this is, in essence, what we might have called in other circumstances a consulting conversation that either resolves the issue or identifies how you go about doing so. And nearly always, it's going to lead to some sort of action, usually by yourselves there or in partnership with the line manager. Because in a sense, it's been focused, you've got clarity, you know what's going on, you've unpacked some of the issues that's there, and it takes you to a point reasonably quickly that says, and what might be done, or what are some of the things that could be done, and who's going to be doing it, and when might we meet again to just reflect on, in a sense, how things have gone. Where it's item B, where things are a need, but in a sense the shape and form and articulation of that is not as clear, then the outcome and the desired outcome is really about clarity and insight and understanding rather than immediate call to action. The real value added you've got is to help that individual sort things out in their own mind, either to see things in perspective when they were struggling with that, to reframe the issue into something that is now something that is clear rather than fuzzy, or to just give them a sense that they now understand what's going on when it had been deeply puzzling. And it may not lead to your continued involvement after that, although it could depend on the outcome. The third one there is when, again, you've observed something which may not be entirely clear to the individual concerned, where you try to seize the opportunity, and you have to time this right, to develop an insight or an understanding about an inferred need. It's one that you see, but they may not. And in terms of outcomes there, if you can do the following, you've actually been very, very successful. If you've helped them to develop an insight or an understanding of an issue that they hadn't been aware of, or they'd not given priority to, or something that seems simple, but then now it's complex, or something that was complex they see as simple. If you really help that reframing, that is a superb outcome. Okay? Particularly if they've been blind to that before. This is, of course, and I think you'll understand that, the most challenging of conversations. Get the timing right, and it might move on. If you get the timing wrong, you could get a little bit stuck there. If your entry point raises their hackles, you may not progress. So this is by far the most subtle approach, and again, it's one that Kate will cover when she covers some of the different frameworks and structures that you can use to approach these conversations. So we've got the summary slides, and by the way, all of these slides are going to be shared with you afterwards. So by all means, take notes if that helps you remember, but everything here you'll be getting from Richard immediately after that. So if I can just go back and have a look at the chat and see what we got there. So I'm going to briefly stop sharing the slides so I can look at your chat responses, if I may. Um,
Let me
so,
pass the
Alicia, you
point on.
said
Yeah, thank you.
disagreement between colleagues and coaching the manager uh, to help them mediate between those is certainly probably a category B, depending on that, unless you're the guy you're talking to says, I got a problem there. It could even be that more subtle C, where actually you can see this there, but it's not being raised with you, and you feel the value that you can give it is intervening in a very careful way. Um, As you said, performance or conduct issues there. That again may be a much more explicit one, which is the category A. Laura, your resistance to change one might be again one that you observe rather than someone actually says, I'm feeling rather resistant to change. In other words, it's one where you're trying to increase their appreciation and understanding that their own behaviors may be getting in the way of their ability to cope with changes around them. Or it may be that they observe resistance to change around them, which might again be an explicit issue. So, again, one of the judgment calls you're making in real time is, in a sense, how's the issue being expressed to me, and how might I effectively deal with this? Is it quite clear? Can we just run with that? Um, is it slightly off beam, or is it vague? And do I actually just help clarify and articulate, or help them articulate for themselves what's going on? Or is it something I observed that they've got a blind spot about? Um, Elizabeth, early signs of disengagement or high performing individuals needing stretch and development there. Again, I think it falls into one of these. It could be any of those categories there, and I think that the judgment calls that you bring will be closely connected to the impact and effectiveness that you have. Um, Checking senior leaders' understanding of a situation. Um, I just put a little bit of a question mark around that because um, that may fall into the coaching category if you've got some real doubts that they don't understand the situation. If it's merely to sort of gain insight or information, it falls, I think, outside of the coaching relationship. But again, it's a judgment call. I think we've been through all of those, but some really great examples there. And I think one of the key things that we all have to do is to be alert to the signals, because sometimes the most valuable conversations aren't triggered by someone saying, "I know precisely what I want to talk about. Can I talk to you about this?" But about you picking up some of the more subtle issues, some doubt in their mind, or some recurring issue that's come up several times in previous conversations, and they seem to be a bit stuck, or whether it's quite clear to you that you've got to pick the right time because something needs to be resolved, even if, in a sense, the person you're talking to has not really got the insight yet or is resistant to that. So each of those prompts a coaching conversation, but of different flavors. And I think, Kate, you're going to come on to some different frameworks which, in a sense, embody those different flavors.
Love that. Thank you, Anton. Really, really helpful. I love the word flavors. So I just love to pick up on some of what you've been saying, which I think lays a fantastic foundation. And I'd like to build in some practical structures and share a few tools and techniques that may help these in the moment coaching conversations when you need to flex and pivot. So picking up on a few points that Anton has really already alluded to, in your role as business partners, you are influencing through the conversations you're having rather than by authority, of course. But often, as I'm sure you find, a lot of HR professionals that I coach and that I train to be coaches, often feel the pressure that they are expected to give the answers, to give the solutions to really quite busy and often senior people in the moment. So some of the things that we really want to share with you are the ways that you can shift your thinking and your approach from sort of jumping in too soon to problem solving or advice giving to helping the person you're partnering to build their own capacity. And sometimes I think there's something really important about if we can draw a solution from the individual we're supporting, it's far more likely to stick in terms of them taking some action steps. So we want to increase their ownership of what's going on and their accountability. And the more trust that you have, the more trust and rapport in that relationship, the easier that will be, of course. And I know that's challenging sometimes, but some of these conversations can really help you to build that extra level of trust. So when is coaching useful? Anton has already been through this in some detail, but just to layer this a little bit, sometimes, this is when the answer isn't obvious. As Anton has just said, there's a pattern. Things keep coming up. You're noticing that something's going on, and maybe the person you're supporting hasn't been able to resolve this over a period of time. Maybe that leader you're supporting does feel stuck or conflicted. It could be a conflict that they're having with another senior person. I've got a few cases to share with you later that illustrate some of this that I've experienced with the people I support. And often I notice, the manager sort of owns the issue, but they're not owning that solution. And we want them to learn. We don't want them to comply. We don't want to be the HR police. Although, of course, there may be a time and a place where you do quite rightly have to step into the advice mode. And that's the judgment piece that Anton was alluding to, of course. So when we're talking about coaching in the moment, we're not wearing our advice hat. We're not mentoring or teaching. We're probably not in that performance management space, although there may be team-related issues that overlap in a little bit of a grey area. But that's the space we're in. So how can some models help? I think it's really important when we're thinking about frameworks and models that we keep them as simple as possible and we don't oversubscribe to them. We don't have to work with them rigidly. I like to always work with things flexibly. What we don't want is that anybody we're coaching to think, oh, I can see she's adapting into coaching mode and she's using some sort of model. The trick is to weave in some of these techniques and structures that support in a really natural conversation. So somebody doesn't feel anything's being done to them. It's a conversation between two people. But it gives you a little bit of structure in that moment under pressure. It uses the time really well, keeps conversations focused. And having that model in your head may stop you jumping into that solutions mode. So they kind of support the skill building in the individual you're supporting. So let me share a few of these that I think are really helpful. You may already be familiar with these. So for some of you, it may be reinforcing some of that and a refresher. Others, they may be new models. So a couple that tend to come up as coaching frameworks that we can use in the moment. So the GROW model, which is very goal focused and practical. And that's the one I'd love to demonstrate with one of you in a brief, informal, confidential conversation today, if somebody is up for that in a moment. Oscar, I'm going to say more about it, all of these in just a second, is both solution and strength based. That can be really helpful because we're pulling out the positives, the strengths in the Oscar model, particularly as well. And the clear model, which can be really helpful if it requires just a little bit more depth, support, sensitivity. And of course, it can be really informal and it can be a blend of some of the skills that I'm going to explain a bit more about. So you can be flexible, of course, in the moment. So let's talk about GROW, if I may, first. You may have come across this one. GROW stands for goal, reality, what's happening now, what are the options, and what will you do, or what is the way forward? So the reason I think this one really is quite impactful is because it is quite simple and intuitive. It's quite flexible and it really fits in quite nicely to those everyday conversations. And we keep the ownership with the individual we're coaching. It's their goal, but we've provided a structure that helps them clear some of the noise and start to see a way through. So what might this look like? So we ask what the goal is. So what is it you'd like to achieve? When would you like to achieve that? And if that's successful, what's happening? So we get them to describe it. They start to crystallize with it and see it in their mind's eye. So that already starts to increase their motivation, bit of energy. Then we need to think about, where are we now? So what's the reality? If that's what you want to achieve in your goal, where are we now? Because that starts to tease out some of the gap between now and where they want to get to. So what's happening now? What have you tried? What's getting in the way? And then we start to move to the options. So what options are there? What have you considered here? And if there were no constraints, what could you try? And then once we've teased that out a bit more, we want to get to some commitment to action. So what is your preferred option? What will you try? How committed do you feel to that? And that's where scaling is wonderful. So how committed on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm about a 7, actually. Okay, what could make it an 8? Is there anything else that could make it an 8? So we're kind of moving them to action and closing it. So that's the one I'd love to have a go at in a moment, but a couple of others to share first, if I may. And here I've also included in the slides just a couple of these in action. So, a grow example might be about team disengagement. Manager coming to you, I just don't know what to do. The goal is about improving team engagement. The reality is there's a lot of lack of trust in the team, priorities are unclear. What can the manager do? Maybe some one-to-ones, resetting goals, a team building session. When can you start that? Actually, I could start those one-to-ones next week. So you start to work through something quite quickly and intuitively. Let me just share a little bit about Oscar. And I think it's helpful to talk through the scenario, because what I love about Oscar is we can bring in some more scaling technique in a little bit more detail. So let's imagine scenario is that a manager is feeling particularly overwhelmed and sharing that they really feel they're failing in that managerial role. So that's the scenario. That's the outcome. What would you like to achieve? What would you like to get to? Like to feel more in control and confident. Okay, so then we can bring in some scaling, which focuses on where they are now. So we're doing it slightly in a different order to grow, but this helps us lean into the positive. Okay, so if that's what you'd like to achieve, to feel more in control and confident, that's a 10. Where are you now? Well, actually, I'm about a 4. Okay, so what tells you you're a 4 and not a 2? That's the positive, because we want them to say, well, actually, I know I'm a 4 and not a 2 because I'm managing to do this. I'm managing to get some one-to-one time, something like that. But they're thinking positively. Okay, so we make the scaling incremental. So if you want to get now from a 4 to a 5, what choices could you make to just move you that little bit up? Because we're not looking for 0 to hero, we're looking for incremental. Well, I could delegate more, prioritize, ask for a bit more support. Okay, great. So what actions can you take now? Well, actually, I need to clarify the priorities with my team and delegate one thing, and that's where I can start. And when will you review? How will you know this has helped? I'll feel less stretched, more focused. So it's a bit more depth around the scaling. But scaling is one technique I'd really encourage you to try out. Really, really powerful to get people to move from generic to thinking more specifically. And finally, just to share the clear model. And I think this is really helpful if there's something really sensitive that someone brings to you. So maybe there is something particularly sensitive, like a bullying or harassment, something like that, that somebody really wants to explore, somebody's feeling particularly emotional, worried, upset. And it may not be appropriate to jump into quite a sort of a goal action focus model. This is where you may want to step back. We talk a lot about contracting and coaching. This is where you might want to ask how you can best help them. What support do they need from you? So that's the contracting bit. How can I help? This sounds really difficult, sensitive. You're signaling you're here for them. And this is where active listening, teasing it out. What's happening? How do they feel? What are they noticing? Reflect back what you're hearing. I'm noticing you're saying, this has happened. This is making you feel this way. You would like it to be different. This is how it is now. We're just listening. We're not jumping in with any action or solutions. So we're exploring, and we may gently tease out some of the thinking and assumptions, but we do a lot more of that before we get to next steps. And that could be over a series of conversations. So just a different way of going a little bit more deeper. And I'll hopefully bring this to life if time in a few cases. But if I may, I'd love to do a quick demo, just a 10-minute demo with one of you and asking everybody else to be off camera. So this is just going to be the GROW model. So the simple and intuitive model. We just need somebody who's got a goal, something, a goal that they'd like to work on. Could be work, could be personal. Doesn't have to be a big, hairy, audacious goal, just something you'd like to achieve. Is there someone who's willing to have a 10-minute informal, confidential chat with me to just demonstrate that GROW framework?
On that note, I'm just going to stop the recording, by the way.